Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for Rocky Mountain Miners at RockyMountainMiners.com. Ever wanted to destroy the Federal Reserve System? Now's your chance. New free market currencies are making our fake government money a thing of the past, and good riddance. If you want to mine new bitcoins and litecoins into circulation, you need a computer set up to crack the codes to the new coins. Get the Prospector from RockyMountainMiners.com. It's ready to do the work right out of the box. Crack the equations, spend the money. Use promo code Scott Horton Show and save $100. Get all the info and get the Prospector at RockyMountainMiners.com. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. And our next guest is Andrew Cockburn. He's got a new piece in Harper's called A Very Perfect Instrument. That sounds like a Brit talking. The Ferocity and Failure of America's Sanctions Apparatus. And as I'm sure you're all very aware, he's the author of the book Rumsfeld, His Rise, Fall, and Catastrophic Legacy, which is great, and which you ought to read cover to cover. I think you will be amazed at some of the stuff in there. Welcome back to the show. Andrew, how are you doing?
Hey, Scott. Always good to be with you.
Good deal. Very happy to have you here. And a very well done essay here in Harper's Magazine about the history of sanctions, not just up to date with what America's doing to Iran and a lot of other countries in the world. But going back to World War I, and I really like your choice of this quote of John Maynard Keynes about how the sanctions regime against Germany, or the blockade against Germany, built up during World War I, became its own job-holding government program that refused to die even after the war. And could you explain a little bit about how that worked?
Right. I mean, they built this. They created this, system for blockading Germany, which worked really well. By the end of the war, half the Germans were starving, and then the war ended. So really, in a sensible world, the blockade would be lifted, and that's what the Germans thought too. But the people who were running the blockade, they thought they'd made it so perfect. In fact, they just brought in some refinements that made it really perfect. And they thought, well, just because the war's over, no need to stop starving the Germans. And they kept it up. So we don't know exactly, but something like 250,000 Germans starved to death after the end of the war, in the 5 months between November and March, when they did start to lift it, because they were scared that the Germans would go communist. Were killed for no reason, just because, the sanctions bureaucracy, as you say, refused to die. And that's, I think that's the way things have continued that way.
Yeah. Love for its own sake is what Keynes called it. Incredible. Yeah. And, this is the kind of thing that, even though this is my job, I still am amazed, shocked, and I can't figure it out when I learn about nuclear weapons lobbyists and how, hey, we got to keep making these H-bombs, right, Congressman? And wow, there's really no morality or larger spirit of public interest even available to these people to think of. It's simply just make that money. That's your job, is getting hydrogen bombs sold. And that's just, I don't know, the incentives to continue on in spite of what's obviously good and right, and so simply, good and right. It's incredible. I see examples like this too, where just like the sanctions regime against Iraq in the 1990s, it was originally created to get them out of Kuwait, and then they never lifted it until 2005 or something.
Well, actually, I think they're only just lifting them now.
Yeah.
But there are people in jail for sending food to Iraq, which they did, for doing that before, when Saddam was still there. And the thing is, and as you're saying, at least people know. You say nuclear weapons, and people know there's a sort of a downside to that, kind of scary, can vaporize millions of people. But sanctions are meant to be nice, hey, let's not go to war, let's have sanctions. Let sanctions, give time for sanctions to work. So they've sold us the idea of this nice, benign, kind of soft thing that, I don't know, maybe cut off people's TV or force them to go to bed early or something. In fact, they are dangerous. They destroy. One of the people, Bob McBrien, who was in charge of global enforcement for sanctions, he told me he said, sanctions destroy people. They hurt. That's the idea. So, one of the things I meant to explain when writing this article was this is a very cruel instrument. I mean, the very perfect instrument was what the British called it, who do the blockade, but it's a very cruel thing. I mean, it really destroys societies, and in a very insidious way.
Mm-hmm. And now, in the 1990s, you and your brother Patrick co-authored a book about Iraqi life under sanctions, right?
Yep.
And I'm sorry, what was the name of that one?
It was called Out of the Ashes. I mean, at that time, when we first published it, and then it was republished as Saddam, an American Obsession. It's basically, the whole story of how before the invasion, we published it in the 90s about what we were doing to Iraq at the time, including starving hundreds of thousands of babies.
Well, I think we talked about the great review that you wrote for the London Review of Books of Joy Gordon's book, Invisible War.
Right.
So if people just Google Andrew Cockburn and Invisible War, there's the short version of that specific story for you.
Yeah.
But it really is, and it really bears repeating too. I think her main thesis, where she draws the distinction between what America is doing to Cuba still after all this time and what happened to Iraq, because during the Cold War, you could still, if America put an embargo on you, you could still go with the other side. But after the end of the Cold War and with the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, there was no other side. It was a unanimous UN Security Council thing with Russia and China in on it, and they would have had to pass a whole new resolution in order to lift them. There was no sunset on it of any kind, and America ruled the Security Council with the 800-ton gorilla kind of situation in the UN, and Iraq had no one else to trade with. I mean, they were really blockaded from the whole world. And so this was basically like what Britain did to Germany. This was not fooling around at all. They killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, that's what we're trying to do to Iran. I mean, things are a little better for Iran now because they can still trade to a limited degree with the Chinese and sell oil to the Chinese and the Indians and some to Japan. But what we're doing, we've discovered this new refinement in the last 10 years, really, which is to use U.S. control of the global financial markets. I mean, basically what they do is they say, unless you follow our sanctions rules, we will cut off your bank's access to the New York financial markets, and you won't be able to trade in dollars, which any bank in the world, that is terrified of that. So that's how it's a new refinement of it's what the Treasury Undersecretary David Cohen said to me was new and innovative strategies to target, to use control of the banks to do this.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, whenever people it's amazing, actually, how much access we have to news stories about people suffering in Iran because of these sanctions due to a lack of medicine and that kind of thing. It really is a different world than when we were just stuck with Jennings, Brokaw, and Rather kind of one-way information. So these stories do get through, if only because of access to British media, really. But people still don't understand because, come on, it's not true that America puts sanctions on medicine. So, I don't know, if some Iranian kid is dying of no medicine, that's got to be his own government's fault for one reason or the other, because I know you're not trying to tell me that America would do that, but that's where we get to all these innovations in targeting the banks and the chilling effect that it has on all business with Iran carried out throughout the world. That's
right, because if you say, you're sanctioning, medical supplies to Iran, they'll say, no, we aren't. There's exemptions for that, which is true. But the thing is, any bank, Iran, no bank will handle that transaction because they're terrified that the U.S. will come along and say, aha, you're dealing with a targeted Iranian entity, that's really a front for the Revolutionary Guard or something, and we're sanctioning you, and bang, you're facing $1 billion fine. So
right, and then if they do that to you, then that means that any business who messes around with you is now playing with the same fire.
Exactly. It's very insidious, very clever actually, but it works well.
Now, but didn't America have to just make gigantic exceptions for Japan and Korea and India too? That you guys can still buy Iranian oil. What are you going to do?
Well, they get waivers, but there's a wrinkle to it. You can get a waiver so long as you are reducing the amount of oil, that you buy less this year than last year. The idea is to progressively reduce Iranian oil exports. I mean, there's a bill coming up in the Congress probably sometime this fall in the Senate. It's already passed the House that will that'll cut that, abolish that waiver. But at the moment, it's the idea is you gently or you gradually squeeze Iranian oil exports so they don't sell any at all.
Mm. Well, and then how bad is it? Because I guess Iran never had that great of an economy in the first place, did they?
Iran was, it's better in a way. It's more developed. It's more developed than Iraq. They have a lot more industry. They can grow a lot more of their own food. It's bad. I mean, times are hard in Iran now. I mean, the inflation is galloping on. Maybe it's like over 100%. Particularly for the price of food. I mean, poor people are being very hard hit. The rich, of course, are not being hard hit. In fact, the rich, as always happens, are making money out of sanctions, because you can do, trade becomes, if you can do it, becomes a lot more profitable. So, you've got, like Maserati sales, Ferraris are selling well in Iran. It's just, the poor folks, as usual, are getting hit.
Mm-hmm. Well, in fact, I was talking with Mohammed Sahimi, and he was saying about how the Revolutionary Guard Corps, they control the oil black market. So as much sanctions as there are on oil and driving up the price of oil, the ones that the individuals and the organization that the Americans hate more than any of the rest of them, they're the ones who benefit the most out of everyone, and
exactly.
At the expense of everyone else.
And this is exactly the same case with Iraq. I can remember being in Baghdad in 1991, 92, and actually meeting with Uday, the sons of Saddam, and their coterie, and they were all. Uday was saying how much money he was making out of trade. There were new trade opportunities thanks to the U.S. So it's the same thing.
It's terrible. Well, and then of course also, as you say, the attack of inflation on what ought to be, right, if we had a sane foreign policy at all, the moderate middle class that we would like to see, the green revolutionary movement that everyone, all the neocons and neoliberals and neo-everybody's loved 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Right.
They're the ones suffering the most from this. They've got whatever they've been able to save has now ceased to exist. Because of price inflation.
That's right. That's what always happens. I mean, it's what we did with Iraq. We wipe out the middle class, which shows really that shows what a reflexive, mindless strategy sanctions are. This is what they do. This is what they always do. I mean, you could absolutely predict the result. You predict what's going to happen, and yet they impose them. Even so, I think it's just to crush the society as a whole. Iraq was in many ways a thriving Middle East, had a horrible dictatorship, but, it was a real country with a very thriving culture and, which didn't follow orders. So we crushed it. And I think we have the same policy to Iran.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of that, what was it that led the Reagan-Bush Republicans to betray Saddam Hussein the way they did? Did he betray them first? I remember there was a thing where he was complaining, or George Shultz was complaining that he wanted a deal. He wanted Bechtel to get a deal with Saddam, and Saddam blew him off. This would have been before the invasion of Kuwait. And, of course, there's the Glass-Steagall memo and that whole scandal about her seeming to give kind of that Willy Wonka warning, no, don't, come back, please don't invade Kuwait kind of a thing. Giving him a green light to do it. Can you fill us in on what you remember from back then?
There's a lot. I don't know when we'll ever know if they'll ever release the documents. I think the plan was, they got Saddam to, in 1980, the prime worry was the Iranian Revolution. So they sent Saddam off, or certainly encouraged him to go attack Iran, which he did, and then and he fought the Iranians to a standstill. So by the end of the 1980s, he'd taken care of that. I think the idea was then they thought that Saddam could be like the new Sadat, a tame Arab dictator who'd do what he was told, not cause any trouble for Israel, and put his money in American banks, and just be one of those people. And for whatever reason, he didn't do that. He was kicking over the traces about Israel. He was kicking over the traces about the price of oil, which he wanted to put up. And then eventually he invaded. He went into Kuwait further than I think he told them that he was going to. He broke the rules. Whatever agreement there was, he broke. And I think they decided, this guy's gone off the reservation, we have to smack him down. I think that's what happened.
Yeah, I guess that's what they say, right? He was supposed to take the northern oil fields. Greg Palast said is kneecapping. He's supposed to go over there and break their knees. He wasn't supposed to go over there and move into their house.
That's right. And turned out he was suddenly there was this guy, he had a big military. I mean, he didn't last long against the Americans, but it was certainly formidable in local terms. And, who knew what he might do then? If he'd kept going, he could have taken Saudi Arabia right there and then. Yeah. But he was stupid and he didn't. So I think they just thought, well, this is as I said, this guy's off the reservation. We can't control him, so we have to whack him. Years ago, a long time ago, in the late 1960s, Lyndon Johnson told the Greek ambassador, he said, okay, we're going to solve the Cyprus problem. There was a Cyprus problem those days, and we're going to, Greece can just take the Greek bit of Cyprus and Turkey will take the Turkish bit, and that's it. And the Greek ambassador said, oh, well, the Greek, the parliament, that would be against the Constitution. The parliament would never agree. And I can't reproduce Johnson's language exactly, but he said, F word, your parliament, F word, your Constitution. You better understand that Greece is a flea, Cyprus is a flea, America's an elephant. And if the fleas itch the elephant, he might just whack them with his trunk and whack them good. And that's what happened. If the fleas itch the elephant, and Saddam was a kind of big flea, but he was still a flea, they gave him a good whacking.
Yeah, well, and that's the whole thing is, it's the Americans. It's not so much an elephant as like maybe the big dumb guy from Beyond Thunderdome or whatever, just punching himself in the face, going after that flea and knocking himself right out is really the thing. I mean, when you look at the declaration of war against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy places that Osama bin Laden put out back in 1996 and then again in 98, it says, it's because you have air bases on the Arabian Peninsula that you use in order to enforce this blockade against the women and children of Iraq. And so that's it. We're going to war against you, and you're either going to take the hint and leave now the easy way, or we're going to bankrupt you until your empire falls apart and force you out completely then. And we decided to go with the second route. Yeah.
Exactly right.
It might as well be Lyndon Johnson running this thing for as well as it's going.
Yeah, although at least Lyndon Johnson, he was our present regime comes to the same thing. It's just, it's all sort of masked with, I don't know. I'd find it very unpleasant, the whole sort of pretense that our prime concern is humanitarianism and all that, when it's clearly not.
Yeah.
So it's,
so what exactly is the policy with Iran? Because the Pentagon doesn't want to have a war against them, and maybe the Israelis want one, but I don't think they can really have one if the Pentagon doesn't want one, right? And so they can't have their regime change, but they won't follow a policy that makes any sense if their policy is to support, green-type reformers who might one day be nice. I mean, here the so-called reformer, the moderate that everybody's supposed to be able to get along with, just won the election, and everybody in America is just mad that now there's somebody that they might have to deal with instead of being able to easily demonize like Ahmadinejad.
Yeah, it's more tricky, now that, Mr. Rouhani's there, it's going to be trickier. But, I mean, I think the last, sanctions resolution passed the House 400 to 20 a few weeks back. So, I think the way they'll deal with Mr. Rouhani is to ignore him. I mean, you got to remember that I think there's various things going on here. One is, well, first of all, the Ayatollah, Mr. Khamenei, he absolutely believes that the nuclear thing is a side issue. That the whole point is to get rid of him and get rid of the Islamic Revolution. So he's not going to he's calling their bluff. He's saying, well, okay, you say it's about the nuclear issue, fine. Mr. Rouhani, I've let him be elected, and he's come to New York to make a deal. Do you want to make a deal? He believes that they don't, and he's probably right. I think they just want to go on punishing, as I quote a congressman in my article, we squeeze and squeeze and then squeeze some more. I think they just want to sort of choke the economic life out of Iran, and they think that'll, Obama, the other thing is Obama, he doesn't have the political courage or political ammunition, but certainly courage to do a deal, which he easily could do on the nuclear thing. So he's just got, if you just keep sanctions on and have a few more, let the Iranians get progressively, more emaciated, that's okay. No political cost. It's just, that's why sanctions are so pernicious, because they're so easy. Hey, just like we'll shut the door on this, squeeze them. Okay, so they can't get medicine. You can't get dialysis machines. You can't get fertilizer. Never mind. It's not an issue over here. We'll just let the whole place, run down.
Yeah, well, and it's the most powerless, of course, who are the ones who suffer the most. So nobody really hears their cries, even inside Iran, right?
Right. And the other point is, they say, supposing, say for the sake of argument, supposing Iran is building a bomb, or, is giving itself the capacity to make the materials, and supposing that happens, we can't, but they go ahead and they get there. I mean, it makes it clear to anyone else trying that, boy, you may decide, it's a good idea to go have a nuclear program, build a bomb, but we will really, really punish you forever if you do that. So it's, it's a good signal to other people, too. I think it's part of the calculation that goes on.
Yeah, giving them the Bradley Manning treatment, make an example out of them.
Yeah. So there we go.
Well, and the thing is, in the background to this, which I'm not sure how familiar, people are, I think they're somewhat familiar with the idea that there's an obvious deal on the nuclear issue right there waiting for everyone. Please keep your enrichment levels down to 3.6% U-235, and any higher than that, up to 20% for your medical isotope reactor, you'll go ahead and have that enriched out of state somewhere and import it, and we will then lift some sanctions and promise not to invade you. Come on, shake hands, big deal. Well, what's so hard about that? And I never even went to diplomacy school, and everybody knows that they could do that right now, but they won't.
Yeah.
And the Iranians have accepted the offer a couple of times, but then Obama has refused to accept their acceptance of his offer.
Well, that's right, but the Iranians have told, I quoted my article, they told Jeffrey Feltman, who is he's Under Secretary General of the UN, but he's an American, was a senior State Department guy. They said in a meeting last year, the Khamenei said, look, I know this nuclear business is all BS. The policy is regime change. Don't think we don't understand that. So they should know that the Iranians are wise to them.
Yeah. Well, and you end your article talking about young men interviewed in Germany about why they supported Hitler, and one of the major responses that they got in the survey was that they remember growing up hungry under the blockade, and this guy was promising revenge for them.
Exactly. exactly. You know, everyone, and it's worth remembering. You know, there's a price for this. I mean, as I was saying earlier, the sanctions that seem cheap and easy, but they're not really, because people remember. You know, we changed Iraqi society, and then wondered why we got suicide bombers. You know.
Right.
So
yeah, Patrick, your brother Patrick has talked about that on the show in the past, about how, and it's in his book Muqtada too, I think, about how in Sadr City in the 1990s, they were so deprived of basic anythings that all they had left was religion in the most fundamentalist form. And they just completely, and it didn't have to be that way at all. That wasn't the course they were on. They, as you were saying, back before they were destroyed and cut off from the world oil market and bombed to smithereens and all of that, it was a pretty advanced society with, a lot of educated people and a pretty thriving economy and a lot of, people living off of oil wealth. And importing food, for example, to eat.
Well, the biggest pediatric problem in Iraq before sanctions, before 1990, was obesity. You know, they were worried their kids were getting too fat. Well, we certainly dealt with that. So, that's what kind of society it was.
Right. Yeah. Lou Rockwell likes to remind us about what a scandal it was when Michael Moore dared show pictures of Iraqis in Baghdad from the street level. That, look, these are human beings, this is a playground where they're playing on, and this is the moms taking their kids to it, and that kind of thing. And that was such a scandal that he dared to humanize the Iraqis on the eve of our mass slaughter of them. And that was where we were then, and I guess, as you're saying now, they waged the same kind of devastating war, but just in a way where hardly anyone takes notice.
Yeah,
a few die at a time, all the time.
Yeah.
Well, and they're saying, from what I've been reading elsewhere too, that you're talking about chemotherapy, cancer drugs, and malaria drugs, and hemophilia drugs, and these kinds of things that the Iranians their industry does not produce.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's and they're being forced. They're importing sort of generic substitutes, that some of which, aren't up to standard, so there's a lot of people being affected that way. No, it's a disaster all around. It really is.
All right. Hey, thank you very much for coming on the show, Andrew. I appreciate it.
All right, Scott. Always a pleasure.
Take care. Everybody, that is Andrew Cockburn. The article, it's a great one. It's at Harper's, A Very Perfect Instrument.
Hey everybody, Scott Horton here for The Future Freedom, the Journal of the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org/subscribe. Now, they publish great articles at fff.org every day, but their best stuff goes in The Future Freedom. It's just $25 a year for the print edition, $15 to read it online, and I got a new one coming out in September in there, U.S. Responsible for Somalia's Misery. Support FFF. Sign up for The Future Freedom at fff.org/subscribe and tell them Scott sent you. Hey, all, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new project, Listen and Think Audio at listenandthink.com. They've got 2 new audiobooks read by the deepest voice in libertarianism, the great historian Jeff Riggenbach. Our Last Hope, Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty by Michael Maharrey of the 10th Amendment Center is available now. And Beyond Democracy, co-authored by Frank Karsten of the Mises Institute Netherlands and journalist Carl Beckman, will be released this month. And they're only just getting started. So check out listenandthink.com. You may be able to get your first audiobook absolutely free. That's Listen and Think Audio at listenandthink.com. Hey, all, Scott Horton here for the bumpersticker.com. I created it but quickly sold to Rick so I could do this instead. In the decades since, he's made one hell of a great company. The bumpersticker.com makes digitally printed, photo-quality, full-color bumper stickers for your band or your business, as well as magnets, adhesive vinyl decals, and labels for products and industrial use, and your political cause or campaign, too. The bumpersticker.com also offers full custom graphic design for bringing your idea to reality. Let the bumpersticker.com help you get the word out. That's the bumpersticker.com at thebumpersticker.com. And tell them you heard it here. Why does the U.S. support the tortured dictatorship in Egypt? Because that's what Israel wants. Why can't America make peace with Iran? Because that's not what Israel wants. And why do we veto every attempt to shut down illegal settlements on the West Bank? Because it's what Israel wants. Seeing a pattern here? Sick of it yet? It's time to put America first. Support the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org and push back against the Israel lobby and their sock puppets in Washington, D.C. That's councilforthenationalinterest.org. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson is a successful former hedge fund manager whose site is unique on the web. Subscribers are allowed a window into Mike's very real main account and receive announcements and explanations for all his market moves. The Federal Reserve has been inflating the money supply to finance the bank bailouts and terror war overseas. So Mike's betting on commodities, mining stocks, European markets, and other hedges against a depreciating dollar. Play along on paper or with real money, and then be your own judge of Mike's investment strategies. See what happens at WallStreetWindow.com.